it might be easier for you to see the speakers rather than to see all of the 40 boxes. It's entirely up to you how you want to view the program. So with that being said, I'm going to turn on my Leadership Harrisburg area hat so that I can take on my facilitator role for this session on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you know, I'm the president and CEO of Leadership Harrisburg area, and we have been incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into our servant leadership training program for 5 years. We have partnered with Joe Robinson, who is the president of the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institute, and a colleague of mine who I've known since, I think, 2005 when I first moved here. Joe and I have known each other for 15 years now. And with the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institute, Joe is bringing different experiences, different information, resources to this curriculum that we've put together on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's say hi to Joe and welcome him to this Rotary Forum.
Good to be here, Rotary.
Thank you so much, Joe. So we thought we would start off, I'm going to share a screen. We thought we would start off with just some information, first and foremost, from Rotary International. And I'll go through this. Has everyone seen this? Everyone seen this statement from Rotary International? At Rotary, we have no tolerance for racism, promoting respect, celebrating diversity, demanding ethical leadership, and working tirelessly to advance peace are central tenets of our work. And I just thought, as Rotarians, it was really important to start there. It's really important to know that the organization where we belong, with 1.2 million members in the world, has no tolerance for racism, and that peace is a central tenet of our work. So it's the umbrella under which we are all working, no matter where we are in the world. Rotary International as an organization has quite a lot of diversity. When we get into individual Rotary clubs, and even at a district level and at a club level, we don't quite have as much diversity if you were looking at statistics. But Rotary is committed to eliminating racism and working toward peace. So I just wanted to start with that information. This is easily found on the Rotary International website. It's easily found if you just do a quick Google search for Rotary Diversity Statement. The other thing I wanted to share about putting this program together is it really stemmed from a program that Joe and I and several other participants did earlier in June, right after the George Floyd death. We put a panel together on diversity, civility, tolerance, and solutions. And that program was so well received. So many people asked for a training. They asked for the next step. What can we do next? And that's where this came from, this particular training. I have found in the past month that there has been so much pain in the Black community. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen people hurting and suffering and wailing in pain over the loss of lives that they've seen. Your Black club members, your coworkers who are Black, your Black friends are hurting. And if we don't acknowledge that right now as Rotarians, we're missing a big opportunity to do what we do best. So with that little bit of an introduction to where we are today and to the hurt in our community that we have an opportunity to come in and solve, I just wanted that to be the place we start. And Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you for some opening remarks before we get into some definitions.
Okay, thank you, Una, and I'll make my remarks brief. Yes, as Una said, this is the genesis of these training sessions. Came out of that one event, that one seminal event that really shook everyone to the core and also opened up a lot of our eyes in our community. And everyone began to realize that there are some things that we as a community can address. And so we're using this kind of opportunity to do that. And certainly the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institute is excited to be in partnership with Una. She and I have talked about ways that we can work together. And so as Victor Hugo said, there's nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come. And so the time is right. And so I'm excited to be here tonight, and I look forward to a spirited and reflective conversation tonight. So I hope people won't be bashful. I hope we will be open, and that we will grow and learn here together tonight. So thank you so much, Una.
And thank you, Joe. And I love that comment, you know, the time is right. And I want to ask you, why do you think now the time is right? Because this isn't the first time we've seen lack of diversity. It's not the first time we've seen racial injustices. Why is now? Why is the time right now?
Yes, right. I think this last incident with George Floyd, I think what happened, I think all the nation observed, and all the world, I might add, observed that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of inhumanity to man, and it was just riveting for people. Certainly there have been other incidences, and as you rightly stated, but some of those, for those who chose to, could rationalize it, some of it away. And but this was difficult to rationalize away. It was right there in front of everyone to see, and it was just so stark that I think it just awakened all of us to say we have got to do better. And I think that's why the timing is right now. And so there's this hunger now and a desire to say, listen, I don't want my children to be brought up in a generation that condones that kind of indifference to another person. And so I think that's why everybody's excited now and focused. And I'm just happy that we have an opportunity to help further that conversation and move the needle.
Yeah, great. And it is time for a change. And what Joe and I talked about is going through some definitions, and we'll kind of open it up for questions and answers after the pictures that we share, and then we'll go on to the next picture. So the first picture, John, is the screen share all good up there? Diversity, equity, and inclusion? Yep. Okay, so if you all can see the first definition, diversity, and the definition is everyone is individual and different. There has been a time in our history, and many of us have probably learned that we should be colorblind, and that colorblindness was a good thing. But that is, being colorblind is totally ignoring someone's individuality. It's totally ignoring someone's history and everything that makes them up as a person, as the unique individual that they are. So with this definition of diversity, everyone is individual and different. In our Rotary clubs, we want diversity. We want diversity of race. We want diversity of gender, age, socioeconomic status, political beliefs, orientation, religion. We want our clubs to be richer with more diversity, to bring new perspectives, to build friendships across all of these differences. And if we're saying that we're colorblind, we're not opening ourselves up to diversity. So Joe, you and I were talking about diversity in some of our Rotary communities, and along the lines of our Rotary clubs should look like the communities that we serve. So in some of those communities, we do have a rich diversity, and we need to do a better job of bringing diversity into our clubs. But in some communities, I can use maybe Perry County as an example. There's not a lot of diversity in that geographical location. So how do they bring diversity into their club when it doesn't exist to a large degree in their community?
That's
Any
right.
thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So while they may not have racial opportunity for racial diversity, there are other opportunities, as Una mentioned earlier. I mean, there are other age groups, and certainly all of us have to be concerned about our organizations not being able to backfill with a younger generation, and we've got to make room for them. We've got to be welcoming, and so that's a form of diversity. And so we have to be. And the thing about diversity, period, is you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional about it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't roll in on the wheels of inevitability. You have to be intentional if you're going to have diversity. And so that's what. And so you have to look for it. So what are the gaps? If we're in a certain county where there aren't many Black people, what's the median age, the mean age of the people in our community? As Una said, what's the economic status? How many young people in our community? And begin to be intentional to make sure that this organization reflects the community we serve. And so it's not just always racial, but again, I think it's intuitive. Everyone understands that there are different degrees of diversity, but I don't think we're all intentional at looking at our organizations and saying, where are our gaps and whose voice are we missing at this table?
Mm-hmm. I'm in full agreement about the intention. And I think for a long time, even in my own club, we've said, oh, well, we're open to all diversity, but we didn't go out and look for it. We didn't go out and get it. And the other thing is sometimes we have to remove barriers to diversity. So my club in particular is expensive because our meal costs are rolled into the dues. And so it's really hard for us to achieve socioeconomic diversity because of our membership dues. And so is that a barrier that we can remove? And there might be some other clubs in similar situations. What barriers can we remove to achieving diversity? Our club also meets at lunchtime, and some people might not be able to get out of work and come to our club on a lunchtime. So a lot of clubs are being creative and starting a second meeting that opens up to membership diversity. But Joe, we've got to be intentional about bringing diverse people into our clubs.
Absolutely. Here. And Una, to that point, I'm glad you said that too about the lunch meetings. I shared with you that lunch meetings, aside from the cost of the Rotary membership, for me, just being anywhere every Monday at 12 noon is not appealing. And you did indicate to me that you all were kind of lax, making some allowances for the attendance rule. And I think that will help because everybody is not interested in doing the same thing for 50 weeks, every week.
Yeah. There's a question: to what degree are the district's clubs gender diverse? Many are, to be sure, but many seem not so much. And you've just answered the question. There are some clubs that in our district that have 90% females. And there are some clubs in the district, maybe one, I'm not sure if it still exists today, John, that was 100% male. There were no women, and they didn't want to do anything about it. They were fine going along that way. But I can tell you that in Rotary International, I think the gender diversity is about 30% women and 70% men still to this day. The year that I was district governor, there were only 20% women district governors in the world and 80% men. As everyone knows, Rotary has yet to see a female president. At this time, however, there are at least 4 women on the Rotary International Board of Directors, and there are, I think, 4 or 5 women on the Rotary Foundation Board of Directors. So Rotary International as an organization is making progress, but our clubs can make progress too. John Anthony Una for president.
I second that emotion.
it's you can imagine the commitment doing these things, and the qualities have to be right, as Joe talked about earlier. The timing has to be right. So our meeting place is accessible to those with physical limitations.
Sure.
Again, some are not, and that's another element of diversity that everyone has to consider. And so the point of identifying diversity as everyone is individual and everyone is different. Rotary is not a one-size-fits-all equation. People are not a one-size-fits-all equation. Everyone is different. Everyone is individual. So finding out what people's needs are and removing barriers to try to incorporate them into your clubs is the point of understanding what diversity is. There are things we can do to increase diversity in our clubs and in our district, and being intentional, Joe's word, that's got to be the word for the day, is being intentional about it. Intentionally invite women, intentionally invite people of color, intentionally invite people who might have physical challenges. Invite young people intentionally. So the next definition is between equality and equity. And this really ties into Rotary's 4-way test. Equity is the quality of being fair. And as Rotarians, we are very concerned with being fair to all concerned. That's one of our elements of the 4-way test. Equality is the state of being equal. And this picture is kind of a cartoon demonstration of the difference between equality and equity. So there are some times that equality is what we want. There are some times where we want equal pay. I mean, there are some times that equality is what we are seeking. But there are many, many more times, I would suggest, that what we're really looking for and talking about and what we should be thinking about is equity. How can we be fair to all concerned? And you can see in this picture, if people in our clubs are willing to share, this can be a very individualized concept. If people in our clubs are willing to share, we have equity. If people in our clubs are willing to create a scholarship fund, for example, that could be used to pay membership dues for people who might not have the means, that's equity. That's how we remove barriers to getting people in our clubs. It's the quality of being fair. Joe, additions to equality and equity?
Yes, excellent, Una, excellent. This slide, I hope it isn't the first time some of you have seen it, but if it is, I hope it kind of really illustrates the point. But when we talk about equity, this slide points out this notion of, other times you hear, well, why aren't others further along than I am? And then this picture points it out. You say, well, they have the same opportunity I have, but as you see in this picture, you say, well, you young men, you have a box too. You can watch the game, but the other guy says, yeah, but I'm 6'4" and you guys are small. So I have an advantage going into this process. And so a lot of times we have blinders and we forget that there are others who don't have the same advantage that we have through no fault of our own. Hey, I happen to be 6'3" and I'm proud of it. And I'm never, ever going to be ashamed of being 6'3". But that also means that I have to make some concession for the person who's only 5'3", and recognize that they're not going to have the same viewpoint, if you will, as that I have. And so if I really want them to walk beside me, in partnership, then I have to figure out a way to neutralize their impediment, if you will. And so this is what this whole equity is about, is again, being intentional and saying, I recognize it, and what can we do to kind of normalize this for everybody? And that's what we're trying to develop, that mindset. And I'll be quiet in a minute, but I just want to say I'm so excited that this is an issue for that Rotary is taking this up, because you guys in my life, Rotary has always been a leader in our community. I as a young man in high school here in Harrisburg, attended Rotary summer camps and leadership camps. So I know the power of Rotary. And so when Rotary International stands up and begins to be intentional about these kinds of things, it spills over into our community. So I commend you.
It truly does. And this is not meant to be any statement of politics or any statement even of economics.
Right.
Equality and equity can be very personal.
That's
We
right.
as individuals can help create equity for those around us. And Joe and I had a really tough conversation about the concept of white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And tying into this diversity, equity, equality. I said to Joe, you know, I've worked hard all my life. I've never had advantages just handed to me on a platter. I've worked hard for everything.
Right.
And Joe really helped me understand that my advantage in many, many ways has been the color of my skin. And people who didn't have the same color of my skin might have been turned away from things that I took for granted. And Joe, can you help us just give a little bit of a framework to white privilege? It's really sensitive.
Yes,
Really
thank you. It is.
For a lot of people.
It really is. And I understand. You know, I always say, you know, whether it's semantics or nomenclature, sometimes you say the term white privilege and that just connotes so many different things to people. But one thing it is not intended to connote is that somehow or another, a white person has not worked hard. Because I know Una is the hardest working woman in show business. And it has nothing to do with the effort that you as an individual has put forth. And I had to share this with another good friend of mine who had that misconception. That's not what white privilege means. It just means that by dint of who you are, the fact that you were born white, you have no reason to feel guilty about being born white. You know, you have no reason to feel guilty about having an advantage. But what it is you need to acknowledge and recognize that your whiteness was an advantage. Again, nothing for you to be ashamed of, but just to acknowledge it. A lot of times, unfortunately, because it's so subtle, some white people tend to believe that everyone had the same opportunity that I had. And that's not the case. There really is a distinction. I tell people, I give an example about the GI Bill. After World War II, soldiers came back. Everybody's fighting in the war, black, white, everyone. But you come back after World War II, and there's a GI Bill. White gentlemen are able to partake of the GI Bill, buy their homes, which is everybody's core foundation for any wealth building is your home. And they're able to take a home, buy that home, and begin to build some generational wealth for their progeny down the line. That same soldier comes back from World War II who's black, is denied the opportunity to partake of that GI Bill and cannot build a home only because they're black. But both soldiers served in the war, and 3 generations later, the white soldier could say, what happened to your family? Well, believe it or not, your whiteness gave you an advantage that I didn't have. You shouldn't feel guilty that you got that advantage, but just acknowledge that I didn't have that same advantage. So it's about acknowledgement that, yes, my whiteness may have given me some advantages that others did not have. And it's just a simple acknowledgement and appreciation for that. Again, not to feel guilty, not to be ashamed, none of that, but just to acknowledge and recognize it. Take the blinder off and say, perhaps that did make a difference. There are countless instances, and I'll be quiet in a moment because our time is ticking away, but there are countless instances where black people will say, there are certain things that as a white person, you never have to be concerned with. A white person gets pulled over by the police, and their first thought might be, Dad, burn it, I'm going to get a ticket, you know, and that's all, and that's true. That's also a black person's thought. I hope I don't get a ticket. But a black person also takes it a step further and says, I hope this interaction with the police doesn't go south, doesn't go left on me, because there's always a potential for that to happen. You call it paranoia, I call it experience. I shared this with Una once the other day. I said, we have to remind people that my experience is not held hostage to your understanding. My experience is not held hostage to your understanding. What I experience. And so it's not all paranoia. It's just born out of my personal experiences. And I'll give you one more example real quickly here. I was driving one time to upstate New York, taking some of my kids up to a summer camp. Well, I had already taken them up and I was going back to get them. And it was late and I got a late start and it was probably, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I called my wife and I said, hey, I'm almost there. And she said, well, don't you be speeding because you don't want to get pulled over out there on the road. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But you know what? What I did do, I thought to myself, I said, you know what? If I happen to get pulled over, I better make sure this cell phone laying here on my console is turned upward with the lights shining on my phone so that there's no possible chance that they'll think that black object laying in my console is some kind of a weapon. Now that's what went through my mind. Now most white people, that would be the last thing on their mind as they're driving down the road, to make sure that if I get stopped, make sure that the cop can readily see that my cell phone is a cell phone. But that's what goes through the mind of a black, and it's not paranoia. It's born out of experiences. And so that's just the privilege that whites have, that's kind of the psychological weight you don't have to carry. Again, not to feel guilty that you don't have to carry it, but just acknowledge that there are others who do carry it. I'll shut up now.
It is great stuff, Joe. It's really valuable for us to hear, and I appreciate you being so raw and vulnerable and sharing those stories. Someone in the chat said, yeah, having the openness, taking the blinders off and understanding that the color of our skin does give us privileges. And he called it lending our access to other people. Like if we have that white privilege, can we lend that access to someone else to give them a lift, like the cartoon, like the cartoon perfectly shows, lending our access to someone else to give them a lift, and that's equity. That's what we're called to do. That's what we have, an opportunity. Rotary opens opportunities. What opportunities do we have to create equity in our clubs and in the community service projects that we do? How can we as Rotarians create equity? So the last definition is inclusion. Inclusion is a sense of belonging, feeling respected, valued for who you are, feeling a level of supportive energy and commitment from others so that you can do your best at work, at home, and in the community. And that includes our Rotary clubs. So here's an example of an experience in my club. Several years ago, we had a young African-American man, maybe not 30, who joined our club and was eager to be in leadership of the club. But it takes time until you can get a seat on the board of directors, and it takes time before you can get into the lineup of officers. And so there seemed to be all these barriers that our club was inadvertently creating. We didn't want to create barriers, but we were inadvertently creating barriers for this person to feel included, because anytime they wanted to step up or step in, we said, no, you have to be here 2 years for that, or no, that committee meets on a Monday and this person couldn't meet on a Monday. Inclusion is also things like, what time of day are your meetings? Where are your meetings held? Do people feel comfortable when they come into your meeting. Of course, we all at Rotary seem to have that table where everybody sits at the same table, and they all, you know, they're friends, and so they gather. But would somebody from the outside walking in feel comfortable? Here are some of the harder questions about inclusion. Do our clubs have inside jokes or teasing that would make someone not feel included? And trust me, I have visited every single club in our district, some of them multiple times. And there are some times where I would say that someone walking in would not feel included. And here's one example too. Rotary is a non-denominational organization. Most Rotary clubs have some type of a blessing or a positive thought or a positive sentiment at the beginning of each meeting. And those are supposed to be non-denominational. Sometimes people forget and they say a religious prayer, or they pray to a religious deity, and that might not be shared by everyone. And so I've been in many clubs in our district where if I were a Jewish person, I probably would not feel comfortable attending that meeting. So if we want diversity, which was at the very beginning, we want people who are all different, then we have to be inclusive so that no matter what their religious or political beliefs are, they can feel safe coming to this meeting, and not that their beliefs will be threatened. I think it is inadvertent. We don't mean to do it. We're just doing what comes naturally to us. But to, again, take the blinders off and understand that some things that come very naturally to us might make another person feel excluded rather than included. Joe, anything to add on that?
No, that's excellent what you said there. And I just think about, you made me talk about, you made me laugh thinking about it. This isn't I mean, we all seen it on TV shows, movies, etc. Someone gets invited to a very formal dinner and they don't know which fork to pick up, etc. And they're intimidated when they get in there, you know, because they're looking at all of this silverware on the table, and some people can be a snob about it and watch you fumble, or some people can, you know, recognize that this may not be your forte, and just as you say, lend their privilege and look for ways to be equitable and not let you feel some kind of way about your inability to understand how to use all this plateware and silverware on the table. You know, it's something we see in movies all the time. It's kind of, we laugh about it, but there's a classic example where someone can be made to not feel like they belong somewhere.
Yeah. Or if they can't make a certain level of donation, which is expected throughout Rotary, and we say, you know, $100 a year to Rotary International. A lot of clubs, my club, say another $100 a year to the club. So someone who can't maybe make $100 but can make $25, that should be okay. Because we want Rotarians who love what we do, who are passionate about what we do, who want to make a difference in the world. And we all know, everyone on this call knows that we need more Rotarians in our club so that we can do all those service projects to make our community a better place. And until we start peeling back some of the barriers and the very unintentional judgments, when someone can't make a donation, we've got to peel those back, and in order to be an inclusive organization. And I can promise you that Rotary would rather have a $25 donation to the Rotary Foundation from someone than to lose that member because they're made to feel bad that they can't make that donation. I want to just acknowledge from Charity, it's a great discussion. It's important for the community members to feel welcome in the club. Having a Rotary mentor was helpful for my comfort in a club without other African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And Charity, God bless you, it's hard to be the only one. And that's kind of the opposite of inclusion, is when you are the only one, whether you're the only person of color, the only person who's under 40 years old, or the only person who's female. When you are the only one, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to carry that weight. So the onus is on everyone else to make the only one feel included. Go on, Joe.
Preach. I'm a preaching girl. I say amen. No, that's great. No, your point's well taken and well made.
There's a question about one aspect of privilege is not being asked to be the representative or spokesperson for your race or a particular group. While being intentional about finding those diverse opinions, how do you go about seeking out that perspective without putting that person on the spot? Any response to that, Joe?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you can ask that person their own personal opinion, but don't preface the question with, what do Black people think about? You know, you don't ask. You know, just like I wouldn't ask anyone else, what do all white people think about? You don't put that on them. So if you just want to get a person who happens to be of color, their perspective, ask that individual their perspective. They're just, the race is not monolithic. You're just asking a Black person. And so if you want to do your survey, say, I've talked to 8 Black people, and this is what I found out. But don't expect one Black person, and don't preface your comment by saying, I'm just curious, what do Black people generally think about? Well, I'm not qualified to think what all Black people think about anything, or all Asians, or all Hispanics, or all whites, or all Greeks, all Italians. Yeah. No one can speak for everybody. So that's the way you have to phrase your question. You are asking an individual who happens to be a person of color their opinion, and you need to recognize that that's all it is that one person, African American person's opinion, one person's perspective, and and you just continue to seek out more perspectives.
Good response. So we have another couple of slides, but are there any questions or comments about this slide? Someone asked if these materials would be available, and John, I'm happy to share. I don't know if you have a registration distribution list that you can push them all out to, and maybe with the recording we can send these slides as well.
I'll make sure they're available.
Thanks. Any other questions about this particular page before we move on? Okay.
I'm encouraged by the questions, Una, and I hope those who are not asking questions, I hope what we're saying is resonating. Even if they're silent, some people are just reflective, and I hope they are. I hope what we're saying here tonight is resonating and is helpful.
I hope so too, and that's why we're here. That's why we're bringing this forum together. So if we have looked at this first slide and we think diversity, equality, equity, inclusion, intent, if we think all of these things are important and we want to get from where we are today to where we want to be in our clubs, the increased diversity in our clubs, the feeling of inclusion, the equity, there are some things that we can hopefully help you with to get there. Number one is to start thinking about, where do you want to be? And start making some goals for your club in regards to diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. And I don't mean the kind of goals that are you're checking off boxes. I mean the kind of goals that you really want to be a more inclusive club. And so in order to do that, we need to reach out to more groups and invite them in. So I'm not a box checker, and I don't think diversity is about checking boxes to say we have one Black person, we have
That's
one
right.
Hispanic person.
That's right. That's
But
right.
if you're not thinking about it, if you're not saying, what do we want our club to look like? Then you're not going to get there. So that's the very first thing, is saying what we want our club to look like, which is important. The other important thing is kind of internal. What do you want to look like personally? And that's where we get to this growth progression.
Mm-hmm.
Increasing your aptitude, if you will, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, increasing that is kind of written out on this progression. Some people start in a place of fear when they're afraid of bringing other people in, or they're afraid of giving up their seat because they might lose something. And acknowledging the fear and moving away from the fear is what we really want to show next. And we have very little time left, like 13 minutes left.
Oh
So
my, boy, time flies.
time flies, and we also have some resources to share, but that's a handout too that can be distributed. So in the fear zone, you might think, and nobody's asking you, and this is for your self-reflection. In the fear zone, some people might be saying, I only talk to others who look and think like me. Or, I don't understand why diversity, equity, and inclusion deserve so much attention. Or, I'm not a racist and I don't see racism as a problem. And some people are in that fear zone. It might not be you, it might not be anyone on this call, but it might be people in your club. It might be people in your family. So,
or in your company.
Or in your company, in those organizations where you kind of weave in and out all these circles in your life. So some people are in that fear zone. I avoid hard questions. And Joe, when people are in that fear zone and we're trying to move our clubs and our organizations beyond the fear zone, what are your thoughts on opening conversations with people who are in the fear zone?
Right. That, in my estimation, the fear zone is because we don't make ourselves vulnerable to engage with other people, to take that risk, just to put yourself out there. I used to tell kids when they get ready to go off to college, I would say to them, when you get to college, you are going to meet people from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds. I said, and it's your opportunity, it's your laboratory to find out about so many different cultures. I said, ask questions, because it's not only you're going to learn, but it's going to be a competitive advantage for you later on in your professional career, because you understand different cultures and people. So get to know people, ask questions. So I say to people who are in the fear zone, you've got to take a risk and just put yourself out there and just get to know somebody. Step outside of your zone and admit what you don't know, and be honest. Be honest. Just be honest. Listen, hey, I need to talk to you. I just don't get this. Explain this to me. Talk to people, and that's how we get out of that fear zone. A lot of times it's just about us not having any relationships with others.
Mm-hmm.
I told Una, and I got to wrap this up, but I told Una I checked my Facebook friends, and I have I counted, and I calculated that about 15% of my Facebook friends are white. Are white. Now I don't know if that's a high number or a low number. It's my baseline, 15%. I don't know that it should be necessarily 60% of my friends are white or 88% or whatever, but it's right now it's at 15. But that's my baseline. And so it says to me, who do you interact with, Joe? And so that's one indicator for me to see, how widespread am I? How much am I putting myself out there? And so I think I'm just challenging us all to put ourselves out there and get into some different and put ourselves in front of some different people and have those conversations, even if they're initially uncomfortable. But it's about learning, listening, and learning. You're having a conversation to learn. So what's the habit number 5? Seek first to understand before you seek to be understood.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
about learning. It's about learning.
And when you're in a trusting environment, and when you have trust with that other person, it's easier to start the conversations.
That's right.
And just to remember to stay out of judgment when you are having those conversations, because
Right.
as we're seeing in the comments, everybody is in a different place. Some people have elements of all three. They're saying in the comments, it's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to be in the growth zone. We all have work
That's right.
to do.
That's
All
right.
of us.
All of us.
When Joe said he had 15% of white friends on his Facebook, I did the same activity. And Joe, my number was about 10%.
10%. Okay.
So
Okay.
I think you're doing good. And I think I have a lot of work to do. About 10% of my friends were non-white, so not in my racial group. So there's definitely room to grow. And it's about learning, which is the next zone. When you're in the learning zone, you work to incorporate more diversity in your work, your home, your Rotary clubs, your community service. You seek out questions that make you uncomfortable. You understand your own privilege. In ignoring racism, you strive to be inclusive. You're vulnerable about your own biases and knowledge gaps. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the past 2 months, and I do consider myself still in the learning zone, one of the biggest lessons I learned is that if we see racism as a problem, which it is, and we say, well, it's not my problem, it's Black people's problem to figure out. My lesson has been, no, it's not. I'm part of the problem. I have to be part of the solution. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me to come to. I thought, well, what role do I need to play in this? It doesn't affect me. It does affect me, and it affects the entire community. So it is all of our responsibility to try and move the needle. I think was said a little bit earlier. Move the needle. Moving the needle into the growth zone is when we're intentional about being inclusive. We understand why it's important. We don't let mistakes deter us. This one is a good one. I yield positions of power to those otherwise marginalized. That's really difficult. To yield our position of power to someone who is otherwise marginalized. When we're working hard to climb the ladder and then we step aside, that's tough. It's a tough challenge. Surround yourself with others who think and look differently. Recognizing racism is present and is a current problem. Educating yourself. So clearly you can see all these things in the growth zone, and we'll share this information. There probably is a lot more information on the growth zone, but looking inward is the place to start. Looking inward, looking around the table, see who else is there. We have got to open our eyes and look. While we're at this point, I think Hector had a question, but Joe, while we're at this point, I think it's really important to just touch on the Black Lives Matter movement, because it seems polarizing. It seems like people get really visceral in their reactions to Black Lives Matter, and they say all lives matter. Right. And I think it can be divisive. So how can we come together around that? How can we understand it better as community and business leaders so that we can help other people understand as well?
Yeah, I've said that, you know, maybe it would be helpful if the Black Lives Matter would BLM would tack on the number two at the end or something, because maybe that would help some people feel less intimidated if you say Black Lives Matter also, you know, because that is all that is intended by that expression, is that Black Lives Matter too. And so if you mentally attach your own TOO or number two, if you like to play with numbers and logos, put that behind BLM, and that is the intent. Now, forget about those who might try to hijack and subversive. You know, we don't get into politics of that. Anyone would try to corrupt anything, but the original intent was to say Black Lives Matter too. That was the intent. You know, and I wish it added two. Uh, and then someone says that there's a rally that says when Black Lives Matters, all lives matters. And the point is, I hope everyone understands the sentiment there. When Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, meaning that if we're all in this thing together, if we are all one United States of America, if we're this, you know, e pluribus unum, then we can't be content to see anyone marginalized. And if I see, as Una says, when you see it, it's our responsibility as a white person. You say, well, I can't say racism is my problem. But if I see it and I can address it, then it's my responsibility to address it. Because that is in fact saying, by my addressing it, I'm saying that all lives matter, including these Black lives. So that's why they say Black lives until all lives matter. You know, Black lives doesn't matter till all lives matter, because that's the whole concept, is that we all have value, and we all have a responsibility to stand up for each other, so that all lives matter. And then one other person asked the question, what do I think of Black politicians with all Black staffs? I think Black politicians perhaps hire all Black staffs for the same reason white politicians hire all white staffs. It's about affinity. It's about who you're comfortable with. I don't necessarily agree per se that you should intentionally just have an all Black staff or an all white staff. I think you should look for diversity, even if you're a Black politician. My office, I'm also the director of the local sickle cell disease council. And when I came to that organization, myself and the two people working there were all African American, three of us. And I hired the first, I hired, when my Black assistant left, I hired a white female, a native Australian who was also Spanish speaking, believe that. And she worked for a year. And then I hired another white female in her stead who worked for me for 8 years. And now I have a Latino woman working for me. So I've tried to diversify my office. The one person who didn't change was a social worker. And as you know, in social work, it's about relationships. So if you can keep somebody there to build that relationship in a social work environment, that's a good thing. So that person didn't change. They're Black and they're there. But yeah, I'm all for diversifying. But sometimes you say Black politicians or white politicians. Black politicians may only have all Black staff, again, because of affinity or because of the opportunity. Maybe that's the only, maybe if they didn't hire those Black people, they wouldn't have a job anywhere in state government or federal government or whatever. So there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm always open to diversity across all staffs, all Black, all Latino, all Asian, that you mix it up. So I'm always in support of that. So I don't know if that answered that person's question, but that's my take on it.
It's a good answer, Joe. I have the, thank you, Joe. I just have this final slide up. It's 7 o'clock right now. I'm not going to leave this slide up because we'll send it out, but these are resources that we can recommend. There's some books to read. There's some things on Netflix. There's some movies. There's some video links that Joe put together and sent me. And I just want to give like two words, and then Joe, I'll give you the final comments here. Just as calls to action for everyone who's here, break stereotypes throughout our Rotary clubs. Break the stereotypes that this is an all-white male organization. And the way we break those stereotypes is we talk to people. We let them know, we tell the stories. we show the pictures where it's not just all white males. So let's break the stereotypes. Let's make sure that when people come into our clubs, that when our club members come, that they feel included and not excluded from our table assignments, our prayers, our jokes. Let's make sure that people feel included, and let's remember to run our activities, our service projects through the four-way test, because it's a really helpful litmus test to ensure that we are being fair, equitable, and inclusive. And with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're at 7:01, so we are on borrowed time.
Oh, my Lord.
To wrap it up with your final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Una, and for convening this session and allowing me to participate with you. And everyone, please, I hope you heard us tonight, and that you, and some of the comments suggest that you did. I'm so grateful for that you took this, received this in the spirit in which we brought it forward, because it's really about making our community better, making Harrisburg better, Dauphin County better, the state better. And it starts with each of us, and these kinds of conversations. So I thank you for your openness. I thank you for just allowing yourself to be vulnerable, just to hear and just to learn. It starts with being open, listening more and speaking less, as we try to learn more and more about one another and about diversity and inclusion. So thank you again for the opportunity, Una. I'm not going to take any more of the borrowed time that we have, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Joe. And don't be surprised if you get some invitations to join Rotary Club after this call.
I've got at least 2 Facebook friend requests, so I'll be answering those later. So my percentage is going up, Una. You got to catch up.
There you go. District Governor John, last remarks, all yours.
I just want to speak for everybody that was here. Joe, that was absolutely outstanding. We are super grateful for your time. And Una, thank you for putting it together. I do have the recording. We'll be putting it into some kind of shared drive so that everyone has the opportunity to share it out along with the slides. Joe, thank you so much. I am one of your friend requests, so please do.
I got you, brother.
Thank you very much. And everyone who came, thank you very much for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again next month at our monthly trainings. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks, Joe.
All right, Una, we'll be in touch. Take care now.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.